believe it or not, I didn't have a 1x6 in my garage. Kind of odd, but I drew one here. So a 1x6 is typically 5.5 inches wide, and so for that you're going to need to cut your pieces at about 12.5 inches. And this is actually going to make a pretty big star if you do make this with a 1x6. I'm going to estimate about 23 to 24 inches wide with the finished star, which might be kind of cool. I wouldn't mind trying that at some point. So, yeah, I'll get to the miter saw. I will cut all my boards to 9 1/4, and then I'll talk to you about setting up the saw for the angles. So as you can see, I ended up with 15 pieces here. This will be enough to make 3 large stars and 3 smaller stars, because we will be using the scraps from cutting the first larger star to make the smaller one. So you get kind of a 2-for-1 deal here. Alright, finally, let's talk about the angles. So the first angle you're going to cut is at 54 degrees. If your saw doesn't go to 54 degrees, you are welcome to check out one of my other videos on my channel. I use a slightly different method of cutting the angles, but you can do it on a saw that only goes to 45 degrees. It's a pretty good video. So, for starters, set your saw at 54 degrees, and I'm going to bring the camera a little closer so you can see exactly what I'm doing. The way we're going to do this is you need to find the center of your board. Now, because I laminated 2 pieces of wood that were exactly the same size, I know exactly where the center of my board is. It's right where the glue joint is. So that makes it easy for me. If you're using a 1x4 or 1x6, you're obviously going to have to measure for that centerpiece. And the goal here is to make that 54-degree angle cut end up right in the middle of that board. So you're going to end up cutting right here, and then you're going to flip it over and cut again. And so if you're slightly off on your first cut, the second cut will equalize it. It'll naturally want to center itself because you're using the stop block and you're just flipping it over. So let's go ahead and cut this first piece here. And there we are. So that point is right in the center. So now that I know that my saw is set up properly and I've got my stop block at the right location, I can just move on to the next piece. I don't have to measure anything else. Make my cut, flip it over, cut it again. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to all 15 pieces, and then we'll move on to the next step. So I got all 15 pieces cut, but I thought I'd just talk about something real quick here. I ended up cutting 1 star and doing a test fit just to see if the angles lined up properly before I cut the rest of them. Otherwise, all my stars would be off. But at first, when I tried to put the stars together, I had a gap like this in this area here. And I'm going to show you why that happened. So I'm just going to move back to my miter saw here. So, my saw is set at 54 degrees right here. You can see that. Now, if I just move this over here, just a little bit, now that appears to be 54 degrees, doesn't it? So that's one of the faults of using a miter saw to make stars. So when I made my first star today, this is where my saw was set, but it was leaving a gap. So if that's happening to you, you just need to move your saw this way a little bit. If the gap is happening at the center of the star, you need to move your saw that way. But as you can see, I only moved it over maybe 0.5 millimeter or so, but that's just enough to make a large gap in your star. So, pro tip there, once you've made your first star and you figured out that your saw should be moved over that way again, and everything's lining up, then you can cut the rest of them, if you're making multiple stars. So the next step is to set your miter saw at 36 degrees, and you don't have to worry about those micro adjustments like you did with the 54-degree angle. The most important angles are these ones that go to the center of the star, because those are the ones that are touching each other and need to line up perfectly. So set your saw at 36, and then get yourself a scrap piece of 1x4 and make a cut at 36. And that's going to be going right here, pretty much up against your blade, not quite touching. And that's going to help us make those cuts and not have our piece of wood, fly that way. The other thing I made here is a fairly simple jig, just made out of some scrap wood. I also cut this angle at 18 degrees. And that's going to clamp on there, and I'm going to be able to stick this piece in this area and put this toggle clamp down, and I'll be able to make that 36-degree angle cut. I also made this little jig, and that's to go on this side of the fence. So I'll just clamp that there, and that's just a little extra support for this piece of wood in case it wants to go that way. So with this setup, everything's pretty solid. If you're not a fan of making all these jigs, definitely check out that other video I mentioned earlier. I'll leave a link to it in the description. But it's a much simpler way of making these stars. But if you want to, experiment with some other ways of making stars, then definitely continue with this video. So I'm going to just clamp everything in place off camera, and then I'm going to zoom in and show you exactly what we're dealing with here. So as you can see, I've added 2 clamps on this side, and just one on this piece over here. And I forgot to mention that this angle right here is 54 degrees. So that's 18, 36, 54, and the saw is set at 36 degrees. And then this piece just slides right in there. And you can see without the toggle clamp, it's actually really solid. But we'll just use it anyways. Now, for the cut, let's just zoom in here. I wanted to show you where to clamp everything together. So you know that with this piece here, your blade is going to come down right beside it. And you are looking to make that cut right at that corner there. And it's going to come right along here to about here. And now earlier you were looking for the center of the board. You don't need to do that here. Like I can already tell I'll be going past the center here, and that's irrelevant, doesn't matter. Once you've figured out where to clamp everything down, do that. Make your first cut, and then we're going to do like we did before, where we just flip it over and cut it again. And these scraps that you're going to be getting from this, those are the scraps you want to keep, because we're going to make another star with that. So why don't I go ahead and make a cut right now. And one thing to mention, I do like to wait till the blade stops before I lift it up again. Otherwise I find that the teeth of the blade will, if they're still spinning, they'll catch on this little piece of wood, and sometimes this will want to kind of jam the blade there. So now I'll lift that toggle clamp off, flip this over, slide it in, and make the next cut. And there we are. Let's just take a look here. And that is a very nice piece for your star. So we're going to do this to all 15 pieces. And then the scraps, save those, because we're going to be able to put them together like this. And then we're going to cut angles over here to make another star. I know, very cool. If you like that, please subscribe. Moving on.